John, I was joking with the Queen's Park bureau chief for Global News, Colin DeMello, yesterday. It's been, quite a summer. Usually it's pretty quiet at Queen's Park during July and August. Not the situation this year.
Not at all. And of course, with having gone through an election, it's kind of not surprising, I guess, from that standpoint. There's you go through a kind of a bruising election like we had, and then add to that the fact that with Ford being reelected, I had kind of predicted that if he got reelected and got a majority, that you would see some fairly quick moves on a number of fronts, and we're seeing it, I guess, with this strong mayor proposal that he's launched. What's
your take on it?
Well, it reminds me a little bit of what it was like when we had boards of control. In the instance of boards of control, you had normally 4 or 5 members, including the mayor. They all ran at large, as the mayor does now. And they formed kind of an executive committee, and I believe it took a 2/3 majority of council to overturn Board of Control, if I'm not mistaken. It certainly wasn't, I don't think it was a simple majority by council. So it's kind of like that, except that it puts all the power, more or less, in one person's hands. And I'm not sure as well, we'll have to see what the legislation looks like, whether this sort of supermajority, I guess, whether it applies to every single thing that comes in front of council, or whether it's limited to certain key issues. So once we get a look at the legislation, and apparently we will get a look at it very shortly, I'm told, then we'll see just exactly what it means. But I think there is I heard Fred Eisenberger talking about it yesterday, and there is a certain logic to the fact that the one member of council who ran at large, only having one vote, and really no more power other than a bully pulpit than every other member of council. These mayoralty candidates have to spend tons of money to get elected, and they do present themselves at large to the entire population. So does it make sense that they only have the one vote? I'm kind of leaning towards seeing what it looks like, and certainly not opposed on the face of it.
Well, one of the things that I was hearing from a political scientist that we interviewed earlier this week was that they would have control over the budget. They would also need to have a larger staff, because there would be more responsibility associated with the mayor's office.
Yeah, I don't have a huge problem with that. I think if you look at the city of Hamilton, the mayor's budget is about $1 million. It sounds like a lot of money, but when you pull out, the mayor's salary and 1 or 2 other people's salaries, it doesn't leave very much for, I think one of the key issues for anybody that is in the position of running a large municipality is having some resources to do some independent research. Right now, any research that's done is pretty much done through staff, and I'm not sure that there wouldn't be some value in the mayor having some resources so that they could investigate issues independently of what staff is possibly telling them. The other thing is, this comparison is certainly not apt for Hamilton, but could be for Toronto. You look at New York City, for instance. The mayor in New York City gets to immediately appoint a police chief, but also gets to appoint the superintendent of education. So, you got the education and every other municipal service all under the purview of the mayor, which is a huge portfolio to have.
Well, as you said, we haven't seen the legislation yet, so we don't know all of the particulars about this. One of the things that I'm kind of uncomfortable about is the possibility for a fiefdom. I mean, there's got to be some checks and balances here.
Well, we have 15 fiefdoms right now, to some would say. It is prone to possible abuse. And I guess, if it becomes too egregious, I guess that's where the 2/3 majority would kick in, but it's going to be difficult to muster a 2/3 majority. And we have to remember as well with this that right now it's only being proposed for Toronto and Ottawa. So it's not something we're going to see in Hamilton, although if it is put through for Toronto and Hamilton, or for Ottawa and Toronto, I should say, there's definitely some of the larger cities are going to be intrigued by it as well.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if there's one thing I know about politicians, it's that they like power and they want more of it. So they're all going to want to have that kind of, I want to get this done sort of attitude. And so give me the power to get it done.
A Hamilton politician half a century ago said unlimited money and freedom from control was his dream. So I don't think it's changed that much, Shiona.
Oh, that's a little unnerving. But with this strong mayor's power, from what I understand from Colin DeMello, who's our Queen's Park correspondent, he was saying that once this passes, and it's going to, Doug Ford not only has a majority, he's got a court precedent in his back pocket saying he can make these kinds of changes to municipal politics, and they can be immediate. This is actually going to take effect before the election.
That's right. It is going to take effect, which means we know that the legislature is going to be recalled in a couple of weeks. So we're going to see this. It's going to be, next to the budget, it's probably going to be the first piece of business that's going to be dealt with. So it will be in place by October when people vote again. And at this point, I'm quite sure that the legislation will only extend to Toronto and Ottawa. Whether it gets changed later on is another matter. But so it's going to be a big deal in Toronto, and it was interesting to see some of the response. It certainly, it wasn't a total outcry against it from some members of council. Some of the members who've been around for a while are basically saying that council has got bogged down on too many issues in Toronto, and maybe this is a way to move things along.
See, it would seem to me that it would be a reasonable response for them to pass this legislation, let it come into effect with the next council, instead of, creating this major change for what really is the lame duck period of time when the election campaign is on.
Well, I think there's provisions for councils during the final. I don't know how long the period is, but there are provisions that prevent councils from doing major spending issues. Even our council here in Hamilton has limited power in the the last 6 or 8 weeks. I don't know exactly what the date is, but there's a point at which only housekeeping matters can be passed by a council. So I think the main impact is going to be after the election. But people need to have it in mind as they're voting, because it looks like John Tory is not going to face any serious opposition at this point, and people can make their own judgment based on how he's performed in the last 2 terms of office as to whether he's going to go crazy when he gets this power. He strikes, I think, most people as being a pretty sober kind of mayor, and he seems to, in his hands, I don't think it'll be as dangerous as it might have been in Rob Ford's hands. Let's put it that way.
Well, and that's one of the examples people have been citing about maybe you need to have those checks and balances in place.
Yeah, and then I think the question is whether a 2/3 overturn is so difficult to achieve that it really doesn't have any real impact. Well, I don't think anybody wants to see a kind of a mayoralty dictatorship. So there perhaps could be some debate about whether the 2/3 piece is the right number. Maybe it's 60% or whatever.
Yeah, and it is an open race in Ottawa because Jim Watson's not running again.
That's right. So you've got 2 different circumstances there. You've got one case where you pretty much know who's going to be the mayor, and in the other case, you don't know, but they're going to get the same power.
Well, and that's also something I think for all municipal politics in the election coming up in October. If Ford can make this change very quickly, when he wishes to, which is apparently the situation, you should be paying close attention to what's happening in your own municipality, who's running for mayor of that city, because these powers could be handed to them at any point.
It's true, and what we've seen with Ford clearly is that he mistrusts the municipal level of government. It's not just this move, but the moves he's making in terms of the Ministry of Housing, Municipal Affairs, where the decision-making power around zoning and expansion and all of those key local issues are increasingly moving into the hands of the Ontario Land Tribunal. And, you see municipalities, you see Hamilton here struggling with the boundary issue, with the minister pretty much saying that he's probably going to step in and do something to expand the boundary. And you look at Burlington, they're struggling as well. They've got, their problem is not boundary expansion, their problem is tall buildings, and I don't see anything with this government that's going to stop those from popping up all over Burlington. So, yeah, there's clearly Doug Ford does not believe that the municipalities are capable of handling some of these issues.
We're in conversation with Bay Observer publisher John Best. We're talking about politics in Ontario. One of the things that you just touched on, which was, for instance, in Burlington, they have to go up, not out. And so there's a question about those big high-rises. This legislation, the Strong Mayors legislation, they have cited the need for a quick fix or fast moving on any possible solutions to the affordable housing crisis. But if you give these sweeping powers based largely on one issue, it's going to have a residual effect for other issues beyond this.
Well, my observation is that affordable housing has been used as kind of a catch-all. You throw out the word affordable housing next to it, and you can almost justify any project these days. And so every high-rise project that's being built, they're talking about 5% affordable housing. That seems to be a number that the industry figures they can live with, I guess. And still, achieve their profit margins. You look at Toronto, however, and I think they've been more aggressive in their zoning, and I think they're looking for something in the area of 20% affordability. But I find that affordable housing is now being used as kind of a halo to put over any measure to make it more palatable to the public, and I think it's, frankly, I think it's a little bit deceptive.
Oh, I agree with you. I think affordable housing to some people might refer to more apartments so that people can afford to live and you can bring down the overall cost of rents. But on the other hand, there are people who say, well, if you expand and you have more housing and surveys, the greater volume and inventory of housing will help trickle down to other areas. But, those are two very different things.
Yeah, I mean, we're in this current little recessionary period that we're in right now. We've seen a big drop in the price of housing. However, it's still not affordable to most people. I mean, you go from an average price of $1 million to $900,000. It's a big drop in a sense, but it really, for somebody that's struggling to put together a down payment, and then. The other issue is the increase in interest rates would more than offset the drop in price in terms of what your monthly payment is going to be. So, we're in a housing crisis. There's no question, it is a supply and demand issue, and if you can get enough houses on the market, it probably will affect prices. But I don't know that we're ever going to get to a point where an ordinary couple, working class couple are going to be able to afford houses the way we, the dream, I guess, of anybody that worked hard, could get a house. But, that seems to be moving into kind of an elite category now.
Yeah. John, what's your take on the Conservative leadership race? We're going to be speaking with Jean Charest after the news at the top of the hour. And there have been some moves on that. I mean, the whole Patrick Brown situation, that seems now like it was months ago compared to what's been happening in the last several days.
Yeah, it does. It's interesting to watch what's going on with that party. It's really, there's a whole bunch of moving parts, and I think a month ago people would have said, well, if they elect Pierre Poilievre, it's almost certain that they can't win an election. But Trudeau's numbers are not great, and there's a lot of churn out there. And as I said to someone a week ago, we have seen at least two instances in Ontario where people voted for somebody they were scared of because they were so fed up with who was in office. The number one example would be Doug Ford getting elected in 2018. I think people were nervous about how radical he would be, and yet they were so fed up with the Liberals that he got in. And as it turned out, he turned out not to be as radical as people thought. But then you go back to Mike Harris. People voted him in with two majorities, and he pretty much lived up to what people were afraid of, but they voted for him anyway. So there is a point, I guess, where people become so disenchanted with the current government that they're willing to take a chance on someone like Pierre Poilievre. And he does appear, at this point at least, to be the front runner. And I know they have a complicated voting system, and maybe John Charest can win under those circumstances. But it's likely that we're going to see really seriously polarized politics, even worse than what we've had in Canada.
Well, I have seen further to that point. I've seen, some tweets and some thoughts being put out there that if Poilievre wins this race, you're going to have the Reg Conservatives wanting to have their own party, and then we've got another split.
Well, and then you go back to 1993 when what used to be called the Conservative Party has two seats, and there's kind of an Alberta rump called the Reform Party, and that's when you start seeing majority after majority for the Liberals happening again. So it's amazing how history continues to repeat itself, and probably not the best outcome for Canadians. We probably do need change, but you need two parties that can appeal to a broad section of Canadians. And right now, frankly, we're in a situation where we don't have one party that's appealing to a broad section of Canadians. So there's a lot of political unrest right now.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about Trudeau's low polling numbers and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, you've had two election cycles where major scandals dropped right in the laps of the Tories. They were not able to capitalize on them and come up with a win.
No, well, and I think it's because of people's unease with what they, I think, view as kind of a hidden agenda by Conservatives. And when you see this stuff south of the border, comparisons with Trump pop to mind, and it really becomes an issue of a party that has largely Western Canadian and rural Ontario and Quebec appeal, but it's just not enough to get across the finish line. I mean, they did get 93 seats with a leader who really significantly underperformed in the campaign. So there's a willingness to give them a shot, but it's not happening. It hasn't happened with the last two leaders, and it may not happen with the next one.
Well, and that's true. I mean, for both of those leaders, Andrew Scheer and Erin O'Toole, they knew their party system very well and how to get elected in that stance. But they weren't able to really put it together in an open federal election.
Yeah, I mean, you have to win in Ontario. You have to win you have to have some success in the large cities of Ontario. And if you're not winning there, it's just almost virtually impossible to form a government. The other problem is that conservative-leaning voters in Quebec tend to not vote Conservative. They tend to vote for the Bloc or one of the other parties. So they're not able to capture seats in Quebec the way Brian Mulroney was able to do.
Yeah, as you said, there are a lot of moving parts. It's very fluid, and that's what makes it so interesting to be a spectator of politics in Canada, I suppose.
It sure does.
Okay. John, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Nice talking to you, Shiona.